A tense mind repels what it desires, while a calm mind allows life to flow naturally. This is not a poetic idea, but a reflection of how human perception shapes experience in every moment of existence. When the mind becomes tight with expectation, fear, or urgency, it begins to distort reality. It no longer sees things as they are, but as it assumes them to be. In that distortion, even opportunities begin to feel threatening. Even progress begins to feel uncertain. And even blessings begin to look like problems waiting to happen. The energy you carry in your thinking directly influences what you notice and how you respond to life. When a person operates from tension, the nervous system remains in a constant state of defense. In that state, the mind is scanning for danger instead of recognizing possibility. It reacts faster than it reflects, and in that reaction, it often closes doors before even understanding what is behind them. A simple delay becomes rejection, a small challenge becomes failure, and a temporary silence becomes abandonment. The tense mind builds stories that do not exist, and those stories become the emotional reality the person lives inside. But calmness changes the entire structure of perception. When the mind is relaxed, awareness expands. Instead of narrowing down to fear-based interpretations, it opens up to multiple possibilities. A calm mind does not rush to label experiences as good or bad. It simply observes first. In that observation, clarity begins to emerge naturally. Decisions are no longer driven by panic, but by understanding. Actions are no longer forced, but aligned with what feels stable and grounded. This natural flow is often misunderstood as inaction, but it is actually the most intelligent state of functioning. A calm mind processes information more accurately, connects patterns more effectively, and responds with precision instead of pressure. In this state, life feels less like a battlefield and more like a sequence of unfolding events that can be navigated with awareness rather than resistance. When desire arises in a tense mind, it becomes attachment. Attachment creates urgency, and urgency creates imbalance. The person begins to chase outcomes with desperation, and that desperation subtly communicates lack. What is being chased feels pushed away because the internal state is not aligned with receiving. The mind becomes so focused on obtaining that it forgets to become the kind of energy that naturally attracts. But when desire arises in a calm mind, it transforms into intention. Intention is steady, grounded, and free from panic. It does not rush or force. It simply moves in the direction of what is aligned while remaining open to timing and process. In that openness, life responds differently. Opportunities appear without strain, conversations flow without resistance, and paths become visible without struggle. There is a subtle intelligence in stillness that cannot be accessed through effort alone. It requires the mind to soften its grip on control. The more tightly life is held, the more it resists. The more gently it is held, the more it reveals itself. And in moments where the mind begins to tighten again, there is always a small gap between reaction and awareness where choice becomes possible, where breath can return before thought takes over, where the body can be reminded that it is safe even without controlling every outcome. And in that gap, the entire direction of experience can begin to shift subtly without force. But this shift is rarely dramatic. It is quiet, almost unnoticeable at first. Yet it changes how reality is interpreted from within moment by moment without pressure building resistance. Overthinking creates resistance, but stillness creates clarity and better decisions. When the mind becomes trapped in continuous analysis, it stops experiencing life directly and begins interpreting everything through layers of assumption. Each thought generates another thought, and soon the mind is no longer responding to reality, but to its own internal commentary about reality. In that state, even simple situations become complicated, not because they are complex, but because the mind is adding unnecessary weight to them. Overthinking often feels like productivity, but it is actually fragmentation. The mind jumps between possibilities, revisits past moments, and rehearses future scenarios as if repetition will produce control. Yet control is never achieved through mental repetition. Instead, what grows is confusion, because each additional thought slightly shifts the emotional state, and those shifting states prevent stable perception. A decision made in one mental state feels different when reconsidered in another, and this cycle continues without resolution. Stillness interrupts this cycle not by suppressing thought, but by reducing identification with it. When the mind slows down, thoughts are no longer treated as urgent instructions. They are seen as temporary movements, passing through awareness rather than defining it. In that space, the pressure to constantly solve everything begins to dissolve. Problems that seemed large in the middle of overthinking begin to shrink when observed without mental acceleration. The same situation remains, but the internal noise around it disappears. Allowing the essential elements to become visible. Clarity is not something created by thinking harder. It emerges when unnecessary thinking is removed. The mind, when quiet, naturally organizes information in a more coherent way. It does not need to force conclusions because understanding arises from direct perception rather than mental construction. In this state, decisions are not rushed, but they are also not delayed unnecessarily. There is a sense of timing that feels natural, as if the mind and situation are aligning without effort. Overthinking creates resistance because it separates the individual from the present moment. Instead of engaging with what is actually happening, attention is pulled into mental simulations. These simulations often carry emotional charge, which intensifies stress and reduces the ability to act effectively. The body becomes tense, the breath becomes shallow, and perception narrows. From this narrowed state, even correct choices can feel uncertain because the internal system is overloaded with competing interpretation. Stillness restores coherence. When attention returns to the present moment, perception becomes direct again. The breath becomes a grounding anchor, and the body begins to relax naturally. In this relaxation, the nervous system stops treating every thought as a signal for immediate action. Space returns between stimulus and response, and in that space, intelligence operates more freely. Better decisions arise not from having more information in the mind, but from having less interference within it. When mental noise decreases, patterns become easier to recognize. The mind can see relationships between events without forcing them, and intuition becomes clearer because it is no longer competing with anxiety-driven thinking. What once felt like uncertainty begins to feel like simplicity, not because complexity disappeared, but because the observer became less entangled in it. There is also a subtle shift in identity that happens when overthinking reduces. Instead of being inside every thought, awareness begins to stand slightly apart from them. Thoughts continue to arise, but they no longer define direction automatically. This shift allows action to become more intentional rather than reactive. Even in moments of uncertainty, there is a quiet steadiness that prevents unnecessary escalation of problems, and in that steady space, perception becomes less distorted by fear-based projections, allowing reality to be met as it is unfolding rather than as it is imagined to be unfolding, with responses arising more naturally, without the weight of internal contradiction accumulating in the background. You do not attract what you chase, you attract what you embody. This principle is not about effort or ambition, but about internal alignment. Many people move through life believing that desire alone is enough to bring results, that if they want something strongly enough, the intensity of their wanting will eventually pull it toward them. But desire without embodiment creates tension, and tension does not generate attraction. It generates distance because the inner state is not matching the outcome being pursued. Embodiment means becoming the emotional and mental state of what you are seeking before it arrives externally. It is not pretending or forcing positivity, but naturally aligning your inner world with the qualities of what you desire. If you seek stability while living in constant internal chaos, the mismatch creates resistance. If you seek confidence while continuously identifying with doubt, the contradiction weakens your sense of direction. Life responds less to what you say you want and more to what you consistently express through your state of being. Chasing creates a subtle signal of lack. When the mind is always reaching forward with urgency, it is also confirming that what it wants is missing. This state of missing energy becomes the dominant frequency of experience. Actions taken from this state often feel rushed, pressured, and emotionally charged. Even when progress happens, it does not feel stable because the foundation remains unsettled internally, but embodiment shifts the entire dynamic. Instead of moving from lack, you begin to operate from presence. You are no longer trying to convince life to give you something. You are aligning yourself with the version of you that already holds the qualities you desire. This shift is subtle but profound. It changes how you speak, how you decide, how you respond, and even how you interpret challenges. When you embody calmness, you do not force calm thoughts. You naturally respond with less reactivity. When you embody confidence, you are not performing confidence. You are less affected by external validation. When you embody clarity, you are not searching endlessly for answers. You begin to notice what is essential without unnecessary mental noise. The external world may not have changed immediately, but your interaction with it transforms completely. Chasing creates fragmentation because attention is always projected into the future. The mind becomes obsessed with the gap between where it is and where it wants to be. That gap becomes emotionally charged, and the more attention it receives, the more significant it feels. This often leads to frustration, impatience, and inconsistency in action. Energy is constantly leaking into comparison, measurement, and self-judgment, all of which weaken natural flow. Embodiment brings attention back into alignment with the present moment. Instead of living in the imagined future, awareness stabilizes in what is already here. From this grounded state, actions become more precise and less emotionally reactive. There is less need to prove something because internal validation begins to strengthen. The person is no longer acting as if they are incomplete, but from the sense that growth is already in motion. Attraction is not a forced mechanism, but a reflection process. Life mirrors the dominant internal condition. If the internal state is fragmented, experiences tend to feel inconsistent. If the internal state is grounded, experiences begin to stabilize. This does not mean life becomes perfect or without challenges, but the way challenges are met changes significantly. There is less collapse under pressure and more adaptability within it. Embodiment also changes perception of time. Instead of waiting for something to happen, there is participation in what is unfolding. Waiting carries tension because it implies separation from the desired outcome. Embodiment removes that separation by aligning identity with the direction of growth rather than the absence of it. And in that alignment, action becomes more natural and less forced. Decisions arise with greater ease, and the internal conflict between wanting and being begins to dissolve gradually without needing external validation to stabilize direction. Inner peace aligns your energy with opportunities instead of forcing outcomes. When the inner world is unsettled, Everything outside feels like resistance. The mind begins to treat life as something that must be controlled, managed, or pushed into place. This creates an invisible struggle between what is happening and what is desired, and in that struggle, energy becomes fragmented. A person may take action, plan carefully, and try harder, yet still feel as if life is not responding, because the internal state is operating in opposition to natural flow. Inner peace is not a passive condition. It is a deeply active state of internal order where the mind is no longer divided against itself. Thoughts still arise, emotions still appear, challenges still exist, but there is no unnecessary escalation within. Instead of reacting instantly to every impulse, there is space. In that space, perception becomes clearer, and decisions are no longer driven by urgency, but by awareness of what is actually required. In the moment when inner peace is absent, even small opportunities can feel overwhelming. The mind adds pressure to choices that do not require pressure. It imagines consequences that have not occurred and builds emotional weight around uncertain outcomes. This emotional weight distorts judgment, making it difficult to recognize what is truly aligned. The individual may then miss opportunities, not because they were unavailable, but because internal noise prevented clear recognition of them. Forcing outcomes often comes from a belief that intensity guarantees success. The harder something is pushed, the more it is assumed to be achieved. But this approach ignores the subtle nature of alignment. When energy is forced outward without internal stability, it creates tension in both thought and action. That tension is sensed in behavior, communication, and decision-making. It can cause hesitation in others, resistance in circumstances, and inconsistency in personal execution. Inner peace shifts this entire dynamic. Instead of pushing toward outcomes, the individual begins to move with conditions rather than against them. This does not mean passivity or lack of ambition. It means responsiveness without resistance. Action is still present, but it is no longer driven by internal chaos. It becomes more precise, more timed, more connected to what is actually unfolding rather than what is imagined to be necessary at all costs. Energy becomes aligned when it is not scattered. A scattered mind is constantly jumping between regret, anticipation, comparison, and self-judgment. In that scattering, no single direction receives full presence. Inner peace gathers this fragmented attention back into coherence. With coherence, even simple actions carry more impact because they are no longer diluted by internal contradiction. Opportunities are often subtle. They rarely announce themselves loudly in the form the mind expects. Many appear as small openings, quiet invitations, or unexpected shifts in direction. A restless mind tends to overlook these signals because it is focused on predefined outcomes. But a peaceful mind is more sensitive. It notices timing, reads situations more accurately, and senses when to move and when to wait without overthinking either choice. There is also a physiological dimension to inner peace. When the nervous system is calm, the body processes information differently. Breathing becomes more regulated, attention becomes more stable, and cognitive clarity increases. This directly influences how situations are interpreted. What once felt like pressure begins to feel like manageable challenge, and what once felt like confusion begins to reveal structure that was not visible under stress. Forcing outcomes often comes with internal exhaustion because effort is being used not only to act but to fight internal resistance at the same time. This dual effort drains energy quickly. Inner peace removes the internal fight, allowing effort to be directed fully toward action rather than internal struggle. And in that shift, even difficult tasks begin to feel lighter in execution, with fewer interruptions from doubt or mental noise that usually accumulates when attention is divided between fear and desire An interpretation of uncertainty continues unfolding. Most exhaustion comes from mental noise, not from life itself. The assumption that life is inherently overwhelming is often a misinterpretation of internal activity. People move through their days believing they are tired because of what they are doing, but in reality, much of the fatigue comes from what is happening inside the mind while they are doing it. There is the surface action of life, and then there is the continuous layer of interpretation, resistance, prediction, and emotional commentary running underneath it. That hidden layer is what drains energy far more than the actual tasks or responsibilities themselves. Mental noise is not just thinking. It is uncontrolled thinking. It is the repetition of unresolved thoughts, the replaying of past conversations, the simulation of future scenarios, and the constant evaluation of self and environment without pause. This internal stream rarely stops even when external activity slows down. Even in rest, the mind continues working, sometimes even more intensely, because there are fewer distractions from its own patterns. This creates the illusion that rest is not working, when in fact, the mind itself has not rested. When attention is divided across multiple inner dialogues, energy becomes fragmented. A person may be physically sitting still, yet mentally they are in several places at once. Part of the mind is worrying about tomorrow, another part is analyzing yesterday, while another part is trying to control what is currently happening. This fragmentation prevents full presence in any single moment, and without presence, the system never fully resets. The body remains active in a subtle stress response because the mind signals that something is unresolved. This unresolved state creates chronic fatigue, not the kind that comes from exertion, but the kind that comes from internal tension. Even simple activities begin to feel heavier because they are layered with unnecessary mental processing. A small decision becomes a long internal debate. A simple interaction becomes an analysis of meaning and consequence. A normal delay becomes a signal of something going wrong. None of these interpretations are required for the situation itself, yet they consume significant emotional and cognitive energy. Mental noise also interferes with perception of rest. When the mind is noisy, rest is never fully experienced. The body may stop moving, but the mind continues producing stress signals. This prevents the nervous system from fully shifting into recovery mode. As a result, even after sleep or pause, there is a lingering sense of tiredness that cannot be explained physically because the real depletion was not muscular or external, but internal and continuous. There is also a subtle pressure created by mental noise that pushes the individual into constant mental labor. Even when nothing is happening externally, the mind feels compelled to keep working on problems that are not currently present. It rehearses conversations that may never happen, prepares for scenarios that may never occur, and revisits memories that cannot be changed. This constant mental engagement creates the feeling of being always on, where there is no true off state for awareness to settle into. When mental noise reduces, something noticeable shifts in how energy is experienced. Tasks that once felt heavy begin to feel simpler, not because they changed, but because internal resistance has decreased. Attention becomes more unified, allowing actions to be completed without unnecessary interruption from thought loops. There is less internal commentary during activity, which means more energy is available for actual engagement rather than interpretation. Even emotional exhaustion is often rooted in mental repetition. The same worry, replayed multiple times, does not create new insight, yet it continues to consume emotional bandwidth each time it appears. The mind often mistakes repetition for problem solving, but repetition without clarity only strengthens the feeling of stuckness. When this repetition slows, emotional space naturally opens, and what felt overwhelming begins to lose intensity. Without external change, silence within the mind is not emptiness, but efficiency. It allows energy to return to its intended direction instead of being constantly diverted into unnecessary processing. In that quieter state, perception becomes more accurate, response becomes more measured, and the sense of internal pressure gradually reduces even as external demands remain present and unfolding without interruption. When you relax your mind, what is meant for you begins to unfold effortlessly. This does not mean life becomes passive or that nothing is required from you. It means the internal struggle that usually distorts action begins to dissolve, allowing events to develop with less resistance from within. Most people assume they are blocked by external circumstances, but in many cases, the real blockage is the continuous tension within perception that interrupts natural flow. A relaxed mind does not mean a mind without activity. It means a mind without unnecessary resistance to its own activity. Thoughts still appear, decisions still need to be made, and challenges still arise, but there is no constant internal conflict around them. Instead of fighting each moment mentally before it even fully unfolds, there is a willingness to meet it as it is. This shift alone changes how life is experienced, because the pressure of trying to control every outcome is no longer dominating awareness. When the mind is tense, it creates a sense of separation from life. Everything feels like something to manage, fix, or overcome. Even opportunities can feel heavy because they are filtered through fear of failure or loss. This internal tension compresses perception, making possibilities appear limited. The more tightly the mind holds onto outcomes, the more constrained experience becomes, not because reality has changed, but because perception has narrowed under pressure. Relaxation restores openness. In that openness, perception becomes less distorted by expectation. Instead of forcing life into a predefined shape, awareness becomes receptive to what is actually emerging. This receptivity allows subtle opportunities to be noticed, opportunities that are often missed when the mind is preoccupied with control. Many of the things people desire already begin appearing in partial form, but they are overlooked because mental noise is too loud to recognize them. There is a natural intelligence in life that becomes more visible when internal interference decreases. This intelligence is not mystical, it is the simple clarity that arises when the mind is not overprocessing every situation. Choices become easier, not because problems disappear, but because unnecessary complication is removed. The mind stops adding layers of fear-based interpretation, and what remains is the actual structure of the situation itself. Effortlessness does not mean absence of action. It means action without inner fragmentation. A relaxed mind can still work, plan, and build, but it does so without carrying the weight of constant internal resistance. This significantly reduces exhaustion because energy is no longer split between doing and mentally fighting what is being done. The body and mind begin to cooperate instead of competing internally, which creates a smoother experience of progress. When the mind is relaxed, timing also feels different. Instead of rushing or forcing outcomes prematurely, there is a sense of natural pacing. Actions feel more synchronized with conditions rather than imposed upon them. This reduces unnecessary mistakes that often come from reacting too quickly out of anxiety or fear. In relaxation, patience is not forced. It arises naturally because urgency is no longer dominating perception. What is meant for you is not something that must be hunted endlessly with strain. It is something that becomes visible when internal noise decreases enough for it to be recognized. Many people already stand near opportunities they desire, but their attention is too scattered to notice the alignment. A relaxed mind increases sensitivity to these alignments, allowing action to become more precise and less wasteful. There is also a deep shift in identity that occurs with relaxation. Instead of identifying as someone constantly trying to fix or reach something, there is a gradual recognition of being someone who can respond intelligently to what is already unfolding. This reduces pressure to force identity into achievement and instead allows growth to feel like unfolding rather than struggle. And in that unfolding, life begins to feel less like resistance and more like movement, where actions arise with less internal friction, decisions require less emotional effort, and the sense of being continuously behind begins to fade as attention settles more naturally into what is present without the need to over-control what comes next. In the end, everything returns to one simple truth. Your inner state shapes your outer experience more than any external effort ever can. When the mind is tense, life feels heavy, even when opportunities are present. When the mind is noisy, clarity disappears, even when answers are close. When you chase life with urgency, you often push away what you are trying to receive without realizing it. But when you begin to relax the mind, something fundamental changes. You stop reacting to every thought as if it is reality. You stop forcing outcomes as if pressure creates progress. You stop living in constant mental resistance and slowly return to awareness, where life is actually happening in that calm space. You begin to see more clearly. You make better decisions without overthinking. You act without unnecessary struggle. You recognize opportunities that were always there but hidden under mental noise. What once felt complicated begins to simplify, not because life changed, but because your perception you do not attract what you chase. You attract what you align with. And alignment is born from inner peace, not inner pressure. It is born from stillness, not struggle. It is born from awareness, not overthinking, so the real shift is never outside. It is always within. And as the mind relaxes, life does not become something you fight against. It becomes something that begins to flow through you naturally, steadily, and with less resistance, revealing possibilities that were always waiting for a quieter mind to notice